I am Emma Mitchell, 19 years old, and last month my parents told me something that changed everything between us forever. You need to find your own way to work from now on, my dad said over breakfast, not even looking up from his newspaper. We're not giving you rides anymore. You're old enough to figure it out yourself. The next morning, I watched through my bedroom window as they surprised my 16-year-old brother Jake with a brand new Jeep Wrangler. Bright red, fully loaded, sitting in our driveway with a giant bow on top. His reward for getting his driver's license on the second try. If you're watching this, let me know in the comments what the most unfair thing your parents ever did was. Hit that like button and subscribe, because what I'm about to tell you will completely blow your mind. This is the story of how I went from walking 45 minutes to work every single day in the Oregon rain while my brother cruised around town in his brand new car, to building a company that made my parents drop their coffee mugs in shock. Growing up in Riverside, Oregon, I always felt like I was living in Jake's shadow, even though I'm 3 years older. My father, Robert Mitchell, works as a regional sales manager for a manufacturing company. He's the type of man who believes hard work builds character, but apparently only for one of his children. My mother, Karen Mitchell, is a nurse at our local clinic. She's more subtle about the favoritism, but it's there in every small gesture and decision. The pattern started when Jake was born. I went from being the center of attention to the responsible older sister who was expected to help out and set a good example. When I turned 10, I got a used bicycle from a garage sale for my birthday. When Jake turned 7, he got a brand new electric scooter and a birthday party at the local arcade with 20 kids. I told myself it was because he was younger and needed more excitement. But as we grew up, the double standard became impossible to ignore. When I wanted to join the robotics club in middle school, my parents said the after-school pickup was too inconvenient. When Jake wanted to play travel soccer 2 years later, they bought him $1,000 cleats and drove him to tournaments 3 hours away every weekend. School achievements followed the same pattern. I maintained a 4.0 GPA throughout high school, worked as a tutor, and even learned basic coding on my own time. My report cards earned brief nods and comments like, "That's what we expect from you, Emma." Meanwhile, Jake would bring home B's and C's and get taken out for celebration dinners because he was really trying and showing improvement. By senior year, I had internalized that I needed to work twice as hard for half the recognition. I graduated valedictorian and got accepted to Portland State University with a partial scholarship. The day my acceptance letter arrived, my parents spent 5 minutes congratulating me before diving into an hour-long discussion about whether Jake's grades were good enough for varsity basketball tryouts. The most telling moment came when I needed a way to get to my job at TechFlow Solutions, a small IT company where I'd landed a part-time position during my freshman year of college. The job was perfect for me. I could use my coding skills, learn from experienced developers, and earn money for school expenses. The only problem was transportation. TechFlow was located on the other side of town, and public transit would take over 2 hours each way. When I asked my parents about borrowing the family car occasionally for work, my dad's response was immediate and non-negotiable. "You chose to take this job, Emma. You need to figure out how to get there yourself. We're not running a taxi service." 3 months later, Jake passed his driving test. I watched from the kitchen window as my parents led him outside, phones ready to capture his reaction. The Jeep was everything a 16-year-old could want: leather seats, premium sound system, GPS navigation. Jake literally jumped up and down, hugging both our parents as neighbors came out to see what the excitement was about. That night at dinner, as Jake showed us photos he'd already posted on social media, I asked the question that had been burning in my mind all day. How much did the Jeep cost? My father set down his fork and looked at me directly. "That's not your concern, Emma. Jake earned this by getting his license and maintaining decent grades." "Decent grades?" I repeated. He has a 2.8 GPA. He's improving, my mother interjected, and he's been through a lot of pressure with basketball season. I thought about my 4.0 GPA, my part-time job, my full course load at Portland State. I thought about the 45-minute walk I'd been making to work every day for 3 months, sometimes in pouring rain, sometimes in the dark after late shifts. I thought about how my feet had developed permanent blisters and how I'd started keeping extra socks at work. So let me understand this, I said carefully. Jake gets a $30,000 car for getting his license, but I have to walk to work because transportation is my responsibility. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, my father spoke, his voice carrying that familiar tone of authority that shut down further discussion. Life isn't fair, Emma. The sooner you learn that, the better. You've always been self-sufficient. We know you can handle whatever challenges come your way. That was the moment everything changed for me. Not because of the unfairness, I'd been dealing with that for years, but because I realized my parents saw my competence as a reason to give me less support, not more. They had confused neglect with building character, and I was done waiting for them to see the difference. If you've ever felt overlooked by the people who should support you most, stay with me. Because what happened next turned years of being underestimated into the fuel for something extraordinary. This journey gets intense, and by the end, you'll see why sometimes the best thing parents can do for you is accidentally teach you that you don't need them to succeed. Looking back, the favoritism didn't start with the Jeep. It had been building for years, like a slow drip that eventually floods the basement. When Jake was 8 and I was 11, I asked for a computer for Christmas so I could learn more about programming. My parents got me a library card and told me I could use the computers there. That same Christmas, Jake mentioned wanting a gaming console, and suddenly there was a PlayStation under the tree with his name on it. Our family lived in a comfortable suburban home in Riverside, Oregon. My dad made decent money in sales, and my mom's nursing salary meant we were never struggling financially. We took annual vacations to the coast, had a 2-car garage, and lived in a neighborhood where most families had similar lifestyles. Money wasn't the issue. Priorities were. When I was 13, I desperately wanted to attend a summer coding camp at the local community college. It cost $300 and ran for 2 weeks. I had researched it myself, found the application, and even written a letter explaining why I wanted to learn programming. My parents said it was too expensive for something that might just be a phase. 2 months later, they spent $800 on Jake's basketball camp without him even asking. When I pointed out the cost difference, my dad said, "Basketball teaches teamwork and leadership. That computer stuff is just sitting alone in a room." The message was clear. Jake's interests were investments in his future. Mine were expensive hobbies. During high school, the pattern became even more pronounced. I joined every academic club I could, became editor of the school newspaper, and even started a tutoring program for struggling students. My achievements were met with brief acknowledgments before the conversation inevitably shifted to Jake's latest basketball game or social event. When I won the regional science fair with a project on sustainable energy solutions, my parents attended for exactly long enough to take a few photos before leaving early to pick Jake up from practice. Meanwhile, Jake coasted through school with minimal effort. He was naturally athletic and charismatic, the kind of kid who could charm teachers into giving him extensions and coaches into overlooking missed practices. When he brought home a D in algebra, my parents hired him a tutor. When I mentioned I was struggling with advanced calculus, they told me to ask my teacher for help during lunch. The double standard extended to household responsibilities. I was expected to help with dinner, do my own laundry, and keep my room clean from the time I was 10. Jake's room looked like a tornado had hit it, and my mom would clean it herself rather than deal with his complaints. When I protested that this wasn't fair, my dad would say, "You're more responsible, Emma. We trust you to handle things without being asked." It took me years to realize that being called responsible and mature was actually code for, "We expect you to take care of yourself while we focus on your brother." The car situation had been brewing since I turned 16. My parents had promised to help me get something reliable for my junior year of high school, but when the time came, they said they needed to wait and see how our family finances looked. I saved every penny from my part-time job at a local cafe, eventually scraping together enough for a 10-year-old Honda Civic with 150,000 miles on it. The day I bought it with my own money, my dad patted my shoulder and said, "See? You didn't need our help after all. This will teach you the value of hard work." That car lasted exactly 8 months before the transmission died. The repair would have cost more than the car was worth. When I asked if they could help me get something more reliable, my parents said they were already stretched thin with household expenses. I was back to bumming rides and taking the bus, which made getting to my job at TechFlow incredibly difficult. The irony wasn't lost on me that my parents claimed financial strain while living in a house with a 3-car garage, taking annual vacations, and maintaining a wine collection in the basement. The money existed. It just wasn't allocated for me. Meanwhile, Jake was already talking about getting his license and which car he wanted. My parents would listen to his preferences with genuine interest, discussing different models and features like they were planning a major purchase. When I suggested that maybe I should get reliable transportation first since I actually had a job and college expenses, my mother would redirect the conversation. "Jake's going to need something safe and dependable for his senior year," she'd say. "He'll be driving to basketball practice and college visits. It's important that he has reliable transportation for these opportunities." The assumption that Jake's future plans were more important than my current reality was so embedded in our family dynamic that questioning it felt like challenging gravity itself. The worst part wasn't even the material inequality. It was the emotional distance it created. I began to feel like a tenant in my own family, someone who happened to live in the same house, but wasn't really part of the central story. Family dinners became exercises in polite conversation, while the real energy and attention flowed toward Jake's activities, Jake's friends, Jake's future. I started spending more time at TechFlow, even when I wasn't scheduled to work. Jennifer Walsh, the senior developer who had become an informal mentor, noticed that I was always the first to arrive and last to leave. "Do you actually live here?" she joked one evening as I was still coding at 8 p.m. "Sometimes it feels more like home than my actual home," I admitted. That conversation was the first time I'd voiced what I'd been feeling for years. My family house was where I slept and stored my belongings, but TechFlow was where I felt valued and understood. Jennifer and my coworker Madison Foster appreciated my ideas, celebrated my small victories, and treated my goals as legitimate and important. When Jake got his Jeep, the symbolism was impossible to ignore. Here was a 16-year-old kid being handed a vehicle worth more than I'd earn in an entire year, while I was walking 45 minutes each way to a job where I was learning skills that could actually change my life. That night, as I soaked my blistered feet and planned my route to work for the next day, I made a decision. If my parents weren't going to invest in my future, I would do it myself. And if they thought being self-sufficient was such a valuable trait, I would show them exactly what their responsible daughter was capable of when she stopped waiting for their approval and started building something entirely her own. The walk to work the next morning felt different. Instead of feeling sorry for myself, I used the 45 minutes to think about the app idea I'd been developing in my spare time. By the time I reached TechFlow, I had a plan that would change everything. Starting college at Portland State while working at TechFlow was like trying to juggle flaming torches while riding a unicycle. Most of my classmates were living the traditional college experience: dorm life, meal plans, study groups that lasted until midnight. I was commuting an hour each way by bus, working 25 hours a week, and trying to maintain the academic standards I'd set for myself in high school. My schedule was brutal. Classes ran from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. I'd catch the 2:15 bus to TechFlow, arriving just in time for my 3:30 shift. On good days, Jennifer Walsh would let me stay late to work on personal coding projects. On bad days, I'd finish my shift at 9 p.m. and still have 3 hours of homework waiting for me when I got home. The 45-minute walk to work became a daily meditation on determination. Rain or shine, through Oregon's endless drizzle and occasional snow, I made that trek. I learned every shortcut, every covered walkway, every 24-hour gas station where I could warm up during winter months. My feet developed permanent calluses, and I went through 3 pairs of shoes in my first semester alone. The physical exhaustion was manageable. The isolation was harder. While my classmates were building friendships over late-night pizza runs and weekend parties, I was usually working or catching up on assignments. I'd overhear conversations about spring break trips and weekend adventures that might as well have been happening on another planet. Madison Foster, my coworker at TechFlow, noticed the toll it was taking. She was 24, a recent graduate from Oregon State, who had landed at TechFlow after a brief stint at a larger tech company in Portland. Unlike me, she had a car, her own apartment, and the freedom to make plans without calculating bus schedules and work shifts. "You look exhausted," she said one Thursday evening as we were closing up the office. "When's the last time you did something fun?" I had to think about it. "I went to a movie with some high school friends over Christmas break." "That was 3 months ago, Emma. You're going to burn out at this rate." Madison started inviting me to grab coffee between my classes and work shifts, always picking places within walking distance of campus. She'd listen to my complaints about family dynamics without trying to fix everything or offer empty reassurances. When I told her about Jake's Jeep, she was the first person to call it what it was. "That's completely unfair," she said bluntly. "Your parents are punishing you for being competent. They're making you subsidize your brother's lifestyle with your own sacrifice." Hearing someone else name the dynamic so clearly was both validating and painful. It confirmed what I'd been feeling but didn't know how to articulate. Meanwhile, back home, Jake was living his best teenage life. He'd drive the Jeep to school, basketball practice, friends' houses, and weekend parties. The vehicle that represented independence and opportunity for him was a constant reminder of what I didn't have. Some mornings, I'd be waiting for the bus in the rain while Jake drove past me, windows up, music playing, completely oblivious to my situation. The contrast became even more stark during family dinners. Jake would casually mention driving to Portland to meet friends, going to movies on school nights, or taking spontaneous trips to the coast. These adventures were only possible because he had reliable transportation and no work obligations. Meanwhile, I'd contribute updates about my classes or projects at TechFlow, only to watch my parents' attention drift back to Jake's social calendar. "Maybe you should focus more on making friends at college," my mom suggested one evening after Jake had regaled us with stories from a basketball team party. "All work and no play isn't healthy." The suggestion felt like a cruel joke. How was I supposed to make friends when I barely had time to eat lunch between classes and work? When my weekends were spent catching up on assignments and picking up extra shifts to pay for textbooks? "I'm trying to build a career, not just get through college," I replied. "There's plenty of time for career building after graduation," my dad said. "College is supposed to be the best years of your life." I wanted to scream that college could be the best years of my life if I had half the support and resources they were pouring into Jake's high school experience. Instead, I excused myself from dinner and went to my room to work on a programming assignment. The breaking point came during midterms of my second semester. I had 3 major exams, a group project due, and a busy week at TechFlow because one of our other developers was out sick. I was running on 4 hours of sleep and surviving on vending machine coffee and granola bars. On Wednesday morning, I overslept and missed my first bus. The next one wouldn't come for 45 minutes, which meant I'd be late for my computer science exam. I called my mom in desperation, explaining the situation and asking if she could possibly drive me to campus on her way to work. "I'm sorry, honey, but I'm running late myself," she said. "You should have set multiple alarms. This is exactly why we've been telling you that you need to be more organized with your schedule." An hour later, Jake posted an Instagram story of himself getting Starbucks before school, the Jeep's leather interior clearly visible in the background. I ended up walking to campus, arriving 30 minutes late to my exam. Professor Anderson, thankfully, allowed me to take it with reduced time, but the stress of the situation left me shaky and unfocused. When I explained what had happened, he looked genuinely concerned. "Emma, you seem to be under tremendous pressure. Have you considered talking to someone in student services about support options?" The idea that there might be help available hadn't even occurred to me. I'd been so focused on proving I could handle everything independently that I hadn't thought to ask for assistance. That afternoon at TechFlow, Jennifer noticed my obvious distress. When I explained the morning's events, she set down her coffee and looked at me seriously. "You know what your problem is?" she said. "You're trying to prove something to people who aren't paying attention to the proof." Her words hit harder than any criticism my parents had ever offered. I was exhausting myself trying to demonstrate my responsibility and capability to people who had already decided that my brother's potential was more worth investing in than my actual achievements. That night, as I walked home from work under the streetlights, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done trying to prove my worth to my family. Instead, I was going to prove it to myself and to the people who actually valued what I was building. The app idea I'd been sketching out during my daily walks was starting to take real shape. Jennifer had been encouraging me to develop it further, and Madison had offered to help with user interface design. Maybe it was time to stop seeing my circumstances as obstacles and start viewing them as the foundation for something bigger. If my parents wanted me to be self-sufficient, I'd show them what real independence looked like. The breakthrough came during the most unlikely moment, while I was debugging code for a client's inventory management system during a particularly stressful week in March. Jennifer had assigned me to fix a persistent error that was causing the system to crash whenever users tried to generate monthly reports. As I traced through the code, trying to identify where the logic was breaking down, I suddenly saw the problem with startling clarity. The issue wasn't just with this particular system. It was a fundamental flaw that existed in dozens of small business software solutions I'd encountered during my time at TechFlow. These companies were using outdated, overcomplicated systems that were never designed for the way modern small businesses actually operate. "Jennifer," I called across the office, "can you look at something?" She came over to my workstation, coffee in hand, and peered at the screen as I explained what I'd discovered. The client's inventory system was trying to integrate with their sales platform, their accounting software, and their employee scheduling system, but none of these programs were designed to talk to each other efficiently. Small businesses are basically duct taping together 5 different software solutions and hoping they work, I said, pulling up examples from 3 other clients we'd worked with recently. They're paying for multiple subscriptions, dealing with data that doesn't sync properly, and spending hours on manual workarounds. Jennifer nodded slowly, her expression shifting from casual interest to genuine engagement. "And you think there's a better way?" "I think there's a massive opportunity," I said, the idea crystallizing as I spoke. What if someone built an all-in-one platform specifically designed for small businesses? Inventory, sales, scheduling, basic accounting, customer management, everything integrated from the ground up. "That's been tried before," Jennifer pointed out. "The big companies like Salesforce have enterprise solutions. But those are built for corporations with IT departments and massive budgets," I countered. "I'm talking about something designed for the local restaurant owner, the boutique clothing store, the small construction company. Simple enough that they can set it up themselves, affordable enough that it costs less than their current collection of software subscriptions. Over the next 2 weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about the idea. During my walks to and from work, I'd mentally catalog every small business I passed, imagining how they currently manage their operations and how an integrated platform could simplify their lives. The local coffee shop, where I sometimes grabbed lunch, was using a tablet for payments, a paper schedule taped to the wall, and a complicated spreadsheet system for inventory. The small auto repair shop near campus had sticky notes covering their computer monitor to track customer information. Madison noticed my distraction during our coffee breaks. "You've been in your own world lately. What's got you so focused?" I explained the app concept, watching her face as I described the potential impact. Madison had studied business at Oregon State and understood the market dynamics better than I did. "The beauty of this," she said, "is that you're not trying to revolutionize how business works. You're trying to eliminate the friction that's already driving these owners crazy. They know what they need to do. You're just making it easier to do it." That perspective helped me refine my thinking. This wasn't about creating groundbreaking new functionality. It was about taking existing business processes and making them seamless for people who didn't have the time or expertise to manage multiple software platforms. I started staying late at TechFlow, using the office resources to research the market and sketch out basic wireframes. Jennifer, who had become increasingly interested in the project, would often stay late too, offering guidance on technical architecture and user experience design. "The biggest challenge will be making it simple enough for non-technical users while powerful enough to handle complex business needs," she explained one evening as we mapped out potential features. "But if you can solve that, you're looking at a market worth billions." The validation I needed came from an unexpected source. Professor Anderson, who taught my database management course, had assigned a semester project where students had to identify and solve a real-world data problem. When I presented my small business platform concept, complete with database schemas and user interface mockups, the response was immediate and enthusiastic. "This addresses a genuine gap in the market," Professor Anderson said after my presentation. "Have you considered developing this beyond the classroom?" After class, he pulled me aside for a longer conversation. "Emma, I've been teaching this course for 8 years, and I rarely see student projects that demonstrate this level of market understanding combined with technical feasibility. Have you thought about entering this in the university's annual innovation competition?" I hadn't even known such a competition existed. Professor Anderson explained that Portland State hosted a startup pitch contest every spring, with winners receiving seed funding, mentorship, and office space in the university's Business Incubator program. "The deadline for applications is next month," he said. "I'd be happy to serve as a faculty advisor if you decide to pursue this." That night, I walked home with a sense of excitement I hadn't felt in months. For the first time since starting college, I had discovered something that felt like more than just checking boxes or meeting requirements. This was a problem I could actually solve, a business I could actually build. When I got home, Jake was in the living room playing video games, the sound of gunfire and explosions filling the house. My parents were watching television, discussing plans for Jake's upcoming spring break trip to California with friends. "How was work?" my mom asked absently, not looking away from the screen. "Good," I said. "I'm working on a project that might turn into something significant." "That's nice, honey," she replied, already turning back to the conversation about whether Jake would need spending money for his trip. As I climbed the stairs to my room, I heard my dad telling Jake that they'd transfer money to his account for the California trip. The casual way they discussed funding Jake's recreational activities while I was walking to work every day felt surreal, but for the first time, it didn't feel devastating. I had found something that belonged entirely to me. A project that excited me, mentors who believed in my abilities, and a path forward that didn't depend on my parents' recognition or support. That night, I started writing my application for the innovation competition. As I outlined the market opportunity, technical approach, and business model, I realized this was the first time I'd worked on something where success or failure would be entirely my responsibility. The weight of that realization was both terrifying and liberating. I was about to find out what I was really capable of when I stopped trying to prove myself to people who weren't paying attention and started building something for people who actually needed what I could create. The Portland State Innovation Competition became my obsession. I spent every free moment refining my business plan, conducting market research, and building a functional prototype of what I was calling Small Biz Suite. The application deadline was only 3 weeks away, and I was determined to submit something that would stand out among what Professor Anderson warned me would be fierce competition. My daily routine became even more intense. I'd wake up at 5 a.m. to code before classes, attend lectures until 2 p.m., work at TechFlow until 9 p.m., then come home and work on my prototype until midnight. The 45-minute walks to and from work became brainstorming sessions where I'd mentally test user interfaces and solve technical problems. Jennifer had become invaluable in helping me understand the technical architecture needed for a multifunctional business platform. During slower periods at TechFlow, she'd review my code and suggest more efficient approaches. "You're trying to build 5 different applications that work together seamlessly," she explained one evening as we debugged my inventory management module. "The key is creating a shared database structure that can handle all these functions without becoming a nightmare to maintain." Madison, meanwhile, was helping me understand the user experience from a business owner's perspective. She had waitressed at several restaurants during college and had watched managers struggle with scheduling, inventory tracking, and sales reporting across multiple systems. "The restaurant where I worked longest used 4 different apps," she told me. One for scheduling, one for inventory, one for sales tracking, and another for customer loyalty programs. The manager spent 2 hours every week just transferring data between systems and trying to make sense of conflicting reports. That feedback helped me prioritize which features to include in my competition prototype. Rather than trying to build everything at once, I focused on creating 3 core modules: inventory management, sales tracking, and employee scheduling that demonstrated how seamless integration could eliminate the data transfer headaches Madison had described. The breakthrough moment came during a particularly challenging debugging session. I had been struggling for days with a synchronization issue that was causing inventory numbers to update incorrectly when sales were processed. I'd been walking to work, mentally cycling through potential solutions, when the answer suddenly became obvious. Instead of trying to update inventory in real time with each sale, I could batch the updates and process them every few minutes with a conflict resolution system that would flag any discrepancies for manual review. It was elegant, efficient, and would prevent the data corruption issues that had been plaguing my prototype. I was so excited by the solution that I actually jogged the last 10 minutes to TechFlow, eager to implement the fix. Jennifer noticed my enthusiasm immediately. "You look like someone who just solved world hunger," she said. "Better," I replied, already pulling up my code. "I just figured out how to make my inventory system actually work reliably." Over the next week, everything seemed to click into place. The modules I'd been building separately started communicating properly. The user interface became intuitive enough that Madison could navigate it without any technical background. Most importantly, the system could handle the kind of real-world data complexity that would make or break its utility for actual small businesses. Professor Anderson had arranged for me to test my prototype with 3 local businesses: a coffee shop, a small retail store, and a car repair shop. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive, but more importantly, it helped me identify features I hadn't considered and problems I hadn't anticipated. The coffee shop owner, Maria Santos, was particularly enthusiastic. "This would save me about 10 hours a week," she said after I walked her through the scheduling and inventory features. "Right now, I'm using 3 different systems and a lot of manual spreadsheets. Having everything in one place would be incredible." Her validation meant more to me than any grade I'd ever received. This wasn't just an academic exercise. I was building something that could genuinely improve people's working lives. 2 weeks before the competition deadline, I hit my first major obstacle. The employee scheduling module, which had been working perfectly with test data, started failing when I loaded it with realistic scheduling complexity. Shifts that overlapped, employees with varying availability, and last-minute changes were causing the system to generate impossible schedules. I spent 3 sleepless nights trying to fix the algorithm, testing dozens of different approaches. Madison found me in the TechFlow office at 2 a.m. on a Thursday, surrounded by empty coffee cups and covered in sticky notes with scheduling logic diagrams. "Emma, you look terrible," she said. "When's the last time you went home?" "I can't figure out this scheduling problem," I said, my voice hoarse from exhaustion. "The competition is in 2 weeks, and this module is completely broken." Madison sat down next to me and studied the screen. "Walk me through what you're trying to do." As I explained the scheduling logic, Madison started asking questions that helped me see the problem from a different angle. Instead of trying to generate perfect schedules automatically, she suggested building a system that would identify conflicts and suggest solutions, leaving the final decisions to the manager. "Most business owners want control over these decisions anyway," she pointed out. "They don't want the computer making choices about who works, which shifts. They just want help spotting problems and organizing the information." That perspective shift solved the problem in 2 days. Instead of building an artificial intelligence system that could replace human judgment, I created a tool that enhanced human decision-making with better data organization and conflict detection. The night before the application deadline, I submitted my competition entry: a 47-page business plan, a working prototype, market research from 15 local businesses, and financial projections that showed a path to profitability within 18 months. As I hit the submit button, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration that I'd never experienced before. For 4 months, I had been building something entirely my own, solving real problems for real people, and proving to myself that I could create value in the world. The next morning, Jake drove past me on my walk to work, windows down, music playing, heading to school in his Jeep. For the first time since he'd gotten the car, I didn't feel that familiar pang of resentment. I was walking to a job where I was learning skills that were helping me build something meaningful, while he was driving to high school classes that he'd probably forget by summer. The competition results wouldn't be announced for another month, but regardless of the outcome, I had already won something more important than any prize. I had discovered what I was capable of when I stopped focusing on what I didn't have and started building with what I did. Jennifer noticed the change in my attitude immediately. "You seem different," she said during our lunch break. "More confident." "I think I finally figured out what I want to do with my life," I replied, "and I'm not waiting for anyone's permission to do it." The waiting period before the competition results would test that newfound confidence in ways I couldn't have anticipated. The Portland State Innovation Competition results were announced on a Thursday morning in early May, just 3 weeks before my sophomore year ended. I was in my database management class when my phone buzzed with an email notification. Professor Anderson had warned all the participants that results would come out sometime that week, but I hadn't expected them so early in the day. I tried to focus on the lecture about SQL optimization, but my hands were shaking as I discreetly checked my phone under my desk. The subject line read, "PSU Innovation Competition. Congratulations, winner." I read the email 3 times before the words fully registered. Small Biz Suite had won first place. The prize included $15,000 in seed funding, 6 months of free office space in the University Business Incubator, and mentorship from successful Portland area entrepreneurs. I barely heard the rest of Professor Anderson's lecture. When class ended, he approached my desk with a knowing smile. "I take it you got some good news this morning?" he said. "I won," I said, still somewhat in disbelief. Small Biz Suite actually won. I'm not surprised, he replied. Your presentation was the most polished and market-ready concept I've seen from a student. The judges were impressed by how thoroughly you'd researched the problem and how functional your prototype already was. That afternoon at TechFlow, Jennifer and Madison threw an impromptu celebration. Jennifer had brought champagne, and Madison had somehow convinced our client meetings to wrap up early so the whole team could participate. To Emma, Jennifer said, raising her glass, who proved that you don't need a trust fund or family connections to build something remarkable. Just determination and really good coding skills. The validation felt incredible, but even more meaningful was the immediate impact the win would have on my daily life. The business incubator office space meant I could finally stop working on my laptop in coffee shops and actually have a professional environment to develop the platform further. The seed funding would let me hire additional developers and potentially quit some of my hours at TechFlow to focus on growing Small Biz Suite into a real company. But the best part was that I had done it entirely on my own. Every line of code, every market research conversation, every late-night debugging session had been my choice, my effort, my vision. That evening, I decided to share the news with my family. I found them in the living room, where Jake was showing my parents photos from his spring break trip to California, while they planned his upcoming summer activities. I have some news, I said, interrupting a discussion about whether Jake should attend basketball camp or get a part-time job. What's that, honey? My mom asked, glancing up from Jake's phone. I won the Portland State Innovation Competition for a business platform I've been developing. The prize is $15,000 in funding and office space to grow the company. The room went completely silent. My dad set down his beer and looked at me directly for the first time in weeks. You won what now? He said. A startup competition. I built a software platform that helps small businesses manage their operations more efficiently. The judges selected it as the most promising student venture out of over 60 applications. Jake lowered his phone, actually paying attention. Wait, you started a company? I'm starting a company, I corrected. I've been working on this for 4 months, building the prototype while keeping up with classes and my job at TechFlow. My mother's expression shifted from confusion to something approaching concern. Emma, you didn't mention any of this before. When have you had time to work on a business? You're already so busy with school and work. I've been using my free time, I said. Late evenings, weekends, during my walks to and from work. I found a problem that needed solving, and I figured out how to solve it. My father leaned forward, his business instincts clearly engaging. What kind of platform? What's the market size? Who are your competitors? For the next 20 minutes, I explained Small Biz Suite, the market research I'd conducted, the technical architecture I'd developed, and the business model I was planning to implement. My parents listened with growing attention, asking increasingly sophisticated questions about revenue projections, customer acquisition costs, and scalability challenges. This actually sounds legitimate, my dad said, which I supposed was the closest thing to praise I could expect from him. $15,000 isn't much for a tech startup, though. You'll need significantly more funding to build this into a real business. I know, I said. The university program includes connections to angel investors and venture capital firms in Portland. The plan is to use this initial funding to develop a more robust prototype and acquire our first paying customers, then raise a larger round based on proven market traction. Jake had been unusually quiet during the entire conversation. Finally, he spoke up. So you've been walking to work every day while building a business that could make you rich? Potentially, I said. It's still very early stage, and most startups fail. But yes, I've been using the time that would otherwise be wasted sitting in traffic or on public transit to think through business problems and technical challenges. The irony of the situation was almost comical. For months, my parents had watched me walk out the door every morning without offering help or showing much interest in what I was actually doing with my time. Meanwhile, I had been developing something that demonstrated exactly the kind of entrepreneurial thinking and business acumen my father claimed to value. "Why didn't you tell us about this sooner?" my mother asked. "We could have helped, or at least been supportive." I looked at her carefully, trying to decide how honest to be. "You've never shown much interest in my academic projects or work activities before. I assumed this would be the same." "That's not fair, Emma," my dad said. "We've always supported your education." "You've paid for part of my tuition," I corrected. "But supporting something means showing interest, asking questions, celebrating achievements. When's the last time either of you asked me about what I'm learning in my classes or what I'm working on at TechFlow?" Another uncomfortable silence filled the room. Jake shifted awkwardly, clearly recognizing the truth in what I was saying. "Well, we're interested now," my mother said. "This is exciting news, and we want to be involved going forward." "I appreciate that," I said, "but I've already built the support system I need. Jennifer is mentoring me on the technical side. Madison is helping with user experience design, and Professor Anderson is serving as my faculty advisor. The university program will connect me with investors and industry experts." My father's expression hardened slightly. "Family should come first, Emma. We have business experience that could be valuable to your venture." "Where was that family support when I was walking to work in the rain for 8 months?" I asked quietly. "Where was the business mentorship when I was trying to balance a full course load with a part-time job? You told me I needed to figure things out on my own, so I did." The weight of my words seemed to settle over the room like a heavy blanket. For the first time, I think my parents were beginning to understand that their benign neglect had consequences beyond just hurt feelings. Jake broke the tension by asking a question that surprised everyone. "Can I see the platform you built?" I pulled out my laptop and spent the next 15 minutes walking him through Small Biz Suite's features. His questions were actually quite insightful, and I found myself enjoying the opportunity to demonstrate what I'd been working on to someone who was genuinely curious rather than calculating potential benefits. "This is really cool, Emma," he said when I finished the demo. "I had no idea you knew how to build stuff like this." "There's a lot you don't know about me," I replied, but without bitterness. "I've been learning to code since middle school, just not where anyone was paying attention." That night, as I walked upstairs to my room, I heard my parents talking in low voices about my news. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone suggested they were finally beginning to recognize that their responsible, self-sufficient daughter had been building something significant while they focused their attention elsewhere. The next morning, Jake knocked on my bedroom door before I left for my classes. "Hey, Emma," he said. "I wanted to say congratulations. What you built is really impressive, and I'm sorry I never asked about it before." His apology meant more to me than my parents' sudden interest in my business ventures. Jake was acknowledging that our family dynamics had been unfair, and that recognition felt like the beginning of a different kind of relationship between us. As I walked to campus that morning, I realized that winning the competition had given me something more valuable than funding or office space. It had finally provided undeniable proof of my capabilities that even my parents couldn't overlook or minimize. But more importantly, it had shown me that I didn't need their validation to succeed. I had built something meaningful with the support of people who believed in my potential from the beginning. The weeks following my competition win brought a dramatic shift in my family's dynamics that was both validating and deeply uncomfortable. Suddenly, my parents were intensely interested in every aspect of Small Biz Suite's development. My father, who had barely acknowledged my existence for months, was now asking detailed questions about my business model and offering unsolicited advice about scaling strategies. "You know, Emma," he said over dinner 2 weeks after my win, "I have connections in the regional business community who might be interested in what you're building. My company works with dozens of small manufacturers who could benefit from better operational software." The offer should have felt supportive, but instead, it felt calculated. For 8 months, He had watched me struggle with transportation to a job where I was learning valuable skills, never once offering to leverage his professional network to help me find better opportunities. Now that my project had external validation and potential financial upside, his business connections were suddenly available. "I appreciate the offer," I said carefully, "but I'm working with the university's business incubator program to identify potential customers and partners. They have established processes for making those connections in a way that protects the company's interests." My mother jumped in with her own suggestion. "What about a family investment? We could provide some additional funding to help you grow faster." I nearly choked on my water. These were the same parents who had claimed financial constraints when I needed help getting reliable transportation to work. Now they were offering to invest in my business venture. "How much were you thinking?" I asked, more out of curiosity than genuine interest. "We could probably do 5 or 10,000, my dad said. "In exchange for a small equity stake, of course. It would be good for you to have family involved as stakeholders." The amount was telling. They were willing to invest in my proven business concept roughly half of what they had spent on Jake's Jeep. More importantly, they were framing it as doing me a favor while positioning themselves to benefit financially from work they had never supported. "That's generous," I said, "but I'm not looking for investors right now. The university funding and mentorship program will get me to the next milestone, and then I'll raise a proper funding round from professional investors." "Professional investors will take much larger equity stakes," my father pointed out. "Family money comes with fewer strings attached." I looked at him directly. "Does it?" "Because I can't think of many things in our family that have come without strings attached." The comment created an uncomfortable silence that Jake finally broke. "What kind of strings are you talking about?" It was the opening I had been waiting for, but now that it was here, I wasn't sure how direct to be. My parents were making an effort to be supportive, even if their motivations seemed mixed. Burning bridges entirely might be satisfying in the moment, but counterproductive in the long term. "I just mean that I've learned to be very careful about mixing business and family relationships," I said diplomatically. "The university program keeps things clean and professional." Over the following days, my parents' attempts to insert themselves into my success became increasingly awkward. My mother started mentioning my business win to neighbors and friends, positioning herself as the proud parent who had always known I was destined for entrepreneurial success. My father began offering business advice during casual conversations, clearly trying to position himself as a mentor figure, despite having shown no previous interest in my career development. The breaking point came during a family barbecue the weekend before I was scheduled to move into the university business incubator office space. Several of my parents' friends and neighbors had been invited, and I quickly realized the gathering was partially designed to showcase my achievement to their social circle. "Emma's started a technology company," my mother announced to the assembled guests. "She won a competition at Portland State and received funding to develop her platform." "How exciting," said Mrs. Patterson from across the street. "It must be wonderful to have such an entrepreneurial daughter." "Did she get her business sense from you, Robert?" My father smiled in a way that made my stomach turn. "We've always encouraged both our children to think independently and pursue their passions. Emma's success is really a reflection of the values we've tried to instill in our family." I excused myself from the conversation and found Jake by the grill, flipping burgers with a somewhat shell-shocked expression. "Are you hearing this?" I asked him quietly. "It's pretty weird," he admitted. "They're acting like they've been supporting your business idea all along." "It's revisionist history," I said. 6 months ago, Dad told me I needed to figure out my own transportation because life isn't fair. Now he's taking credit for teaching me independence." Jake set down his spatula and looked at me seriously. "Emma, I need to tell you something. When you first mentioned your competition win, I didn't say anything because I wasn't sure how to bring it up. But I've been thinking about how different our experiences have been." "What do you mean?" "I mean, everything has been handed to me," he said. The Jeep, the college planning, the spending money, the assumption that my activities and interests matter. I never had to work for any of it, and I never really thought about what that meant until I saw how hard you've been working just to get basic support. His honesty surprised me. I had assumed Jake was either oblivious to the favoritism or simply comfortable accepting it. I've been wondering, he continued, whether getting everything so easily has actually hurt me. You've developed all these skills: coding, business planning, problem solving under pressure. I can't really do anything except play basketball and get decent grades when someone pushes me to. Before I could respond, my father approached with one of his business colleagues in tow. Emma, I'd like you to meet Mike Henderson. He owns 3 auto repair shops in the Portland area and might be interested in your business platform. Mike shook my hand enthusiastically. Your dad tells me you've built something that could help small businesses manage their operations more efficiently. I'd love to hear more about it. I spent the next 15 minutes explaining Small Biz Suite to Mike, who asked thoughtful questions and seemed genuinely interested in the scheduling and inventory management features. It was exactly the kind of conversation that could lead to a pilot customer relationship. This sounds like it could solve real problems for my business, Mike said when I finished my explanation. How do we move forward with testing it? I'll give you my contact information, I said, and we can set up a more detailed demonstration next week. As Mike walked away, my father clapped me on the shoulder. See? I told you my business connections could be valuable. Mike's shops are exactly the kind of customers you need. The presumption in his comment was staggering. He was taking credit for the introduction while positioning himself as integral to my business development efforts. Dad, I said, keeping my voice level, I appreciate you making the introduction, but I need to be clear about something. This business is mine. I built it, I'm funding it, and I'm running it. I'm grateful for introductions to potential customers, but I'm not looking for business partners or advisors from the family. His expression shifted from pride to irritation. Emma, I'm trying to help you succeed. You're being unnecessarily rigid about accepting support. Where was this support 8 months ago when I was walking to work in the rain? I asked. Where was the help when I was trying to balance school and work without reliable transportation? You told me I needed to be self-sufficient, so I became self-sufficient. You can't suddenly decide to be involved now that there's potential upside. My mother, who had been listening from nearby, joined the conversation. We've always been proud of you, Emma. Just because we didn't express it the way you wanted doesn't mean we weren't supportive. Supportive would have been showing interest in my projects before they won prizes, I replied. Supportive would have been offering help when I needed it, not when you could benefit from it. Jake, who had been watching the exchange with obvious discomfort, surprised everyone by speaking up. They're right, though, he said, about not being supportive before. I've been thinking about it since Emma won the competition, and we pretty much ignored everything she was doing until it became impressive to other people. My parents turned to look at Jake with expressions of surprise and concern. Jake, that's not fair, my mother said. We've always cared about both of your achievements. Have you? Jake asked. Because I can tell you exactly how much my Jeep cost, how much you're spending on my senior year activities, and how much you've budgeted for my college expenses. Can you tell me how much Emma spent on textbooks this year? Or how many hours she works at TechFlow? Or what her GPA is? The silence that followed was deafening. My parents clearly had no idea about any of those details, despite the fact that I lived in the same house and ate dinner with them most nights. The point isn't that you should know every detail of my life, I said. The point is that you should have shown enough interest to know some of them. Instead, you treated my independence as an excuse to focus your attention elsewhere. My father's face was flushed with anger and embarrassment. We raised you to be self-reliant, Emma. I'm sorry if that hurt your feelings, but it clearly worked out well for you. It did work out, I agreed, but not because of your parenting philosophy. It worked out because I had mentors like Jennifer and Professor Anderson, who actually supported my development. It worked out because I found people who believed in my potential before I had anything to prove. The barbecue continued around us, but the conversation had shifted the entire dynamic of our family relationships. For the first time, Jake was questioning the favoritism he had always accepted, and my parents were being forced to confront the reality of how they had treated their children differently. That night, as I packed my things to move into the business incubator office space the next week, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. I was proud of what I had accomplished and excited about Small Biz Suite's potential. But I was also sad about the family relationships that had been damaged by years of unequal treatment and selective attention. The difference was that now I had proof of my own capabilities that no one could diminish or overlook. Whether my family learned to relate to me differently going forward was their choice. But my success no longer depended on their recognition or support. I had built something meaningful entirely on my own terms, and that achievement belonged to me regardless of how anyone else chose to respond to it. 18 months later, I stood in the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Seattle office, watching the morning fog lift off Elliott Bay. The view still amazed me, not because it was luxurious, but because it represented a choice I had made entirely for myself. Small Biz Suite had grown beyond anything I had imagined during those late nights coding in my college dorm room. We now served over 2,000 small businesses across the Pacific Northwest, with a team of 12 employees and offices in both Seattle and Portland. Our platform had evolved into exactly what I had envisioned, a comprehensive solution that eliminated the software chaos plaguing small business owners. Last month, we had closed a Series A funding round of $3.2 million, led by a venture capital firm that specialized in enterprise software solutions. But the real transformation had been internal. The anxious, approval-seeking college student who used to walk 45 minutes to work in the rain had evolved into someone who recognized her own value, independent of others' recognition. The healing process hadn't been linear or easy. There had been nights when old patterns of self-doubt would surface, moments when I'd catch myself seeking validation from people whose opinions shouldn't matter. I had found a therapist in Seattle, Dr. Reynolds, who helped me understand that my parents' behavior had never been about my worth or potential. Some parents, she explained during one of our sessions, are simply unable to see their children as individuals separate from their own needs and assumptions. That limitation belongs to them, not to you. Those words had been transformative. They helped me reframe 2 decades of experiences through a lens of understanding rather than resentment. I was learning to acknowledge the pain without letting it define my future relationships or business decisions. The most unexpected development had been my relationship with Jake. After that barbecue confrontation, something had shifted in his perspective. He had called me 2 weeks later, asking if we could meet for coffee when I was back in Portland for a business meeting. "I've been thinking about what you said," he told me during that conversation, "about how everything was handed to me while you had to work for everything. I think it actually hurt me more than it helped." Jake had made the difficult decision to turn down my parents' offer to pay for his senior year spring break trip to Europe. Instead, he had gotten a job at a local sports equipment store and was saving money to pay for his own college expenses. When my parents protested that he didn't need to work, he had stood his ground. "I want to try doing things the Emma way," he had told them. "I want to see what I'm actually capable of when I have to figure things out myself." Now Jake was a sophomore at Oregon State, majoring in business and working part-time at a startup in Corvallis. He had become one of Small Biz Suite's biggest advocates, referring several small businesses in his college town to our platform. Our relationship had evolved into a genuine friendship based on mutual respect, rather than the competitive dynamic our parents had fostered. My relationship with my parents remained more complicated. After the barbecue confrontation, they had made various attempts to redefine their role in my success. My father had suggested joining Small Biz Suite's advisory board to provide seasoned business guidance. My mother had tried to arrange interviews with local business magazines, positioning herself as the supportive parent who had always nurtured my entrepreneurial spirit. I had established clear boundaries, maintaining polite but limited contact while refusing to pretend our history had been different. We spoke monthly by phone, and I visited Oregon for major holidays, but the visits were brief and carefully structured. Dr. Reynolds had helped me understand that forgiveness didn't mean pretending the hurt hadn't happened, but rather choosing not to let it control my future decisions. "You don't owe them the success story they're trying to claim," she had told me. "Your narrative belongs to you alone." The Small Biz Suite Foundation had become one of my greatest sources of purpose. Using 5% of our revenue, we provided technology scholarships and mentorship programs for students who, like me, were determined to succeed despite limited family support. The foundation covered not just tuition assistance, but also provided laptops, software licenses, and internship opportunities with local tech companies. Madison had joined Small Biz Suite as our head of customer success after graduating from Oregon State. Jennifer had left TechFlow to become our chief technology officer, bringing her expertise in system architecture to help us scale efficiently. Professor Anderson served on our advisory board, providing the same thoughtful guidance to our company that he had once given to me as a student. These people, along with my team and my brother, had become the family I had created for myself. We celebrated product launches together, supported each other through business challenges, and shared in each other's professional victories. It was a different kind of family than the one I'd been born into, but it was built on genuine respect and mutual investment in each other's success. The most powerful lesson I had learned was that true confidence comes not from others' approval, but from the deep knowledge of your own capabilities. Every time my parents had told me to figure things out myself, every time they had prioritized Jake's convenience over my needs, they had inadvertently helped forge the resilience that ultimately led to my success. "The people who are meant to support you will do so without being asked," I had written in a recent blog post for young entrepreneurs. And sometimes the people who should help you the most are the ones who teach you to stand firmly on your own. Last month, I had received an unexpected text from my father. Jake had apparently told him about a local restaurant that was struggling with inventory management and suggested they contact Small Biz Suite for help. The restaurant owner, after implementing our platform, had seen a 30% reduction in food waste and saved over 10 hours per week on administrative tasks. "I wanted you to know," my father's text read, "that what you built really does help people. I'm proud of what you've accomplished." The message was simple, but it represented something I had waited years to hear. Not the calculated pride that came after external validation, but genuine recognition of the value I had created. It didn't erase the past, but it suggested the possibility of a different kind of relationship going forward. As the Seattle morning brightened and my team began arriving for our weekly strategy meeting, I reflected on how far I had come from that 19-year-old walking to work in the Oregon rain. The journey had been painful at times, but I wouldn't change it. Every challenge had shaped me, every disappointment had redirected me towards something better, and every moment I had spent believing in myself when no one else did had strengthened my resolve. The conference room was filling up with brilliant people who had chosen to join Small Biz Suite's mission. Madison was reviewing customer feedback reports. Jennifer was sketching out our technical roadmap for the next quarter. Our newest hire, a recent graduate from Portland State, was presenting user interface improvements that would make our platform even more intuitive for non-technical users. These weren't just employees. They were collaborators in building something meaningful. The company culture we had created was everything I had wished for in my own family. Recognition based on contribution, support without conditions, and celebration of individual growth within shared goals. Have you ever felt overlooked by the people who should have been your biggest supporters? Or have you discovered your own chosen family who truly appreciates your potential? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by others' recognition. Thank you for following my journey from walking to work to building a company that serves thousands of small businesses. Remember, sometimes the greatest success comes from learning to believe in yourself when no one else does. And sometimes the people who underestimate you end up providing the greatest motivation to prove them wrong, not for their benefit, but for your own. The walk may be long, but every step teaches you something about your own strength. Keep walking, keep building, and keep believing in what you're capable of creating.